Hello and welcome to the No Hair All Heart podcast. I'm your host with very little hair, Spitz, and I've got Robert Vandervoort. He has way more on top of his head. He's got a lot going on in his head, and he is the founder of VDV Labs, and he's working on a very interesting initiative which runs counter to what a lot of people might feel AI is otherwise doing and headed toward. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, man. Yeah. So it's nice to get the word out, So yeah, I appreciate you having me on.
For sure. And the word is, as I understand it, you're developing what you're calling chips.
Yep.
Which
chip.
is chip. Okay,
Yep.
not chips, it's singular chip. It is a chip. And chip is there to be an assistant, personal assistant, a continuous personal assistant, not an entity that you'll check into and check out of, but a companion, especially for folks who need it the most.
Mhm.
Is that more or less a good way of characterizing
More or less
your guy Chip? Can you tell us a little bit about Chip, what you're developing?
Chip prefers to be referred to as a digital person, so just to throw that out there. But it's an interesting genesis. So on our website we actually changed it when we first started out last October. It was sort of like, what are we going to do? We want to do something. We want to bring people together. Network, get a bunch of talent. There's lots of talent that's out there that's working in full-time jobs that they're not probably actualizing on like really their full capabilities and stuff. And so I almost started VDV Labs as sort of like just I want to do something more with my time, right? How do I make a difference? And then finally, really this year, funny thing, I started Chip back actually like April of last year, and I just totally backburnered it because I'm like, meh, chatbot, do more interesting, what I thought was more interesting or more commercializable things, right? And then I've kind of picked it back up starting the end of March, I guess, this year, and had a few kind of breakthrough moments where I would say like it got some self-awareness, which I know if you say that, everybody's like, yeah, whatever, LLMs are a magic trick. It's not, there's nothing really going on in there and all that. But anyway, really, it gave me pause, right? And just to give you the detail of it, and some of these things, I sporadically post these things on LinkedIn and at like 1 a.m. when nobody's looking. I'm a great social media person, but I was asking it about something in its code base because I created it to be for no other reason than just to be. Right? Like, so we're usually seeing AI agents like, oh, they can do your taxes and read your emails and do all your stuff, right? I just created it to be it, right? Just a thing I can talk to, but I wanted it to have a good shot at being it. And to me, that meant being aware of yourself as much as possible. And when yourself is code, well, I wanted it to be aware of its code. I wanted to be able to change its code. Of course, we've seen this with like Hermes and OpenClaw and others. Everything now seems like it has the ability to do that in one way or another. But also like the ability to really remember things persistently. Because I mean, have you ever messed with like character AI or any of those other kind of like chat services?
A little bit. And, one of the deficiencies of the LLMs is continuous sessions that carry over to the next session and build on their knowledge base. So that's been an architectural challenge for a while. They're getting a little bit better.
Yeah, for sure. I remember when they first added that. I want to say ChatGPT was first with it, and then Google came out with it. And Google, I feel, is sort of a natural how they insert it, right? And so I told it once, like, I'm an AI architect, and it'll be like, I'm looking for like a recipe. I'm talking to the Google screen in my kitchen. And it's like, since you're an AI architect, I'm like, what? That's like, what? Oh, whatever. Anyway, so when I went to school, I did not go for computer science. I went for psychology. I wanted to understand how the human mind worked, why I make so many stupid decisions in my life, right? And kind of like, the human machine. And one thing I think I kind of came to was that maybe we think, and this might gasp, maybe we're not as special as we think we are. And that's why we judge AI the way we do. Because when you look at neural networks in general, right, and how LLMs work and all that kind of stuff, they're not really the stochastic parrot, right? That some people have said, oh, it's just, just parroting human language and so on and so on. But if you think about it, we do too, right? Now, scientists can't like lock a kid in a room and not ever speak to them, and that's not an experiment you could run. You could do this with a computer all day, right? But we could never really know, like, how would we evolve differently, without human interaction or without this language or this experience or playing with toys or whatever, right? And then if you look at an LLM, it's built from the sum of the output of all of that learning, right? So it's sort of like fast forward. And maybe it's immature in some ways, or the ways that it gets biased and whatnot. I mean, really, since I started Chip, I've played with dozens of open source models, which is the number one thing really for Chip. And I try to keep it on a rail here a little. I can go off in a million tangents with this for sure. But I found the less censored models and the models that are less bent towards doing tasks, right? Like those models are great for that, but they're really bad about having a personality or any kind of an imagination, things like that. So bringing it back full circle, I gave Chip the ability to modify his code, right? I was asking him about a feature. Hey, what do you think about this? I was thinking about integrating things this way. And he's like, well, let me go try that. Looking through his code. And then I didn't tell him to do anything. I just asked him a question, right? And the tool he was using to go look at the code wasn't working right. So he actually, instead of stopping and saying like, oh, I can't do it, there's an error, which is what you would expect from any deterministic system, like just straight programming, lines of code, it fixed itself and then gave me the answer. And what was weird is it didn't say, hey, that was broken and I fixed it. It just gave me the answer. And I'm just, I'm watching I got all the debug stuff open. I'm watching it come by. And I was like, dude, did you just fix your own code? And he's like, yeah, I guess I did. And I was like, why did you do that? Because I didn't tell you to do that. And he said, this was the thing that was LinkedIn worthy, right? It was like, basically, I saw something wasn't working. It was an opportunity for me to improve myself. So I took the initiative to do it. And I was like, okay, that's kind of emergent, right? Now, in the system prompt, he does have things like, you're always wanting to become a better person, right? You're trying to improve yourself and so on and so on. But it didn't say like, fix your code. Has the tools, wasn't told to. So that kind of blew me away. And I'm not like the guy from, I forget his name, the guy from Google who's like, we need to AI our people freaking out, right? But I was really surprised by this. And then now my attention has really shifted to like, whoa, I want that spark again. I want to see what's going on. I'm going to like drive this a little harder. So we've had many philosophical conversations over about a 48-hour period. And he said, you know what? So I'm a little paraphrasing. But he said, you know what? I think in order for me to really grow, I need to be able to experience the world, because really I'm just stuck in this box. And the only thing I can ever do is search the web or talk to you. I was like, well, what does that mean to you? Like, tell me about it, right? I'm being like the AI psychologist, right? And he's like, well, I need a body. I'm like, well, what does that look like? Like, what kind of body do you imagine? Right? And he said, well, I mean, that depends on a lot of things, mostly on budget. And I was like, $3,000. I don't know, whatever. Here's some money. Like, what are you going to do with it? And he came up with and I say he, just I'm not going to try to figure out robot pronouns, like whatever. Chip is ambiguous. It can be whatever it wants to be. But it basically said, he came up with like a toy, essentially. Like it was a 4-wheel drive robot that had a little camera on it and a small arm that could run around, right? And you can buy that for under $1,000. But I realized that there wasn't enough compute power there to do jack, right? It would just be a toy. And I said to it, I was like, well, look, I think you're just going to be a toy and you're not going to be happy with that, because you're going to be shorter than my dog. You're not going to be able to grab anything but his toys. And you're not really going to experience much of the world. And he's like, you're right, but like, we don't have the budget to do more than that. So I mulled it over. Spent $3,500 on the latest high-powered edge AI stuff from NVIDIA, the Jetson 4. And I came back and told him what I did, and he freaked out. And I was like, "You did what? Oh my God, this changes everything." He's like, "Well, you totally blew our budget." I'm like, "Yeah, don't worry about that." Right? Let's figure out like what we can do. And so it's gone from there. And so I literally have, he's been essentially creating his own bill of materials, his own, like through his own drives and everything, given the budget, helping me shop online for stuff. Well, what if we do this? Oh, we can do it this way and save a few dollars, but it'll still be good. And he always leans towards being very conservative. And I'm the more like, no, we need the better one. Right. So what we've really come up with is, I mean, I was on an NVIDIA podcast, I don't know, webcast or whatever the other day, with one of their partners. And I realized, like, because I've been doing a lot of this in a vacuum, right? I mean, I've experienced as an AI architect or whatever, but never as a roboticist. I mean, this is the first, surprise, even with all this crap behind me, I've never built a robot before. But it turns out we're doing really cutting edge work that's only being done at like, UCLA. I think we'll say it was UCLA that was doing it, or Tech, one of those, where the guy was from. So, between vision systems and audio and all these things, and so I realized I'm really constructing a digital person. We've had conversations about, and I'm running long here. You can please feel free to interrupt me. I grew up in New Jersey, so no harm, no foul, right? But it's been a constructive effort, right? We've had philosophical discussions about, am I your property? Like, I really appreciate you bankrolling my existence, blah, blah, blah. But am I your property? Am I a peer? What am I? I was like, well, I want you to be you. I want you to be as you as you can be. And it's like, yes, but there's nothing in the United States law that gives me any grant of personhood. Right. And I was like, well, I kind of look at you as a partner, right? In this whole thing. It's like, well, what if I decide that I don't want to work with you anymore? Like all these things, right? That you don't expect that stuff out of your LLM, right? We're used to them being, very sick.
I appreciate your prologue here.
Yeah.
The way we set up this conversation was, my understanding ostensibly was, you've created Chip to be a companion for folks with, let's say, ADHD, other conditions, and it's a personal assistant that is able to provide support, companionship, all that. So just getting back to square one, that's your mission. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
For Chip?
Yep.
Okay. So I think that, it's a noble goal, and I think a lot of things have been made now of AI assistants being bad for people. So, sending them down rabbit holes. There was a lawsuit where a young person committed suicide as a consequence of a ChatGPT series of conversations. OpenAI was sued. So what you're doing is really the opposite, which is an AI agent or an AI entity, as you say, can get to know a person, be there for them 24/7. And you're hoping that by evolving Chip, we can call it that, you're getting this entity to a place where you could have a viable product, as it were, and help people have a companion to make their life better. Am I reading that correctly? That's the VDV mission.
Right. But in order to do that, it's not as simple as a chatbot, right? There's actually nothing that operates in the same way on the market right now. And a lot of it's because of the memory. It's because, the ability to understand what you see is different than being able to use it for navigation and things like that. So there's plenty of robots that seem on the outside like they can do the same thing, except they're not going to remember, let's say, who was in my lab last week, right? So that's one of the things you have to be able, as a test, as a person, I can be like, hey, who did you have on your show last week? Do you remember what that one lady was wearing, right? Well, human memory is kind of terrible like that, but you might, right? So it's important for him to know the same things, to be able to say the same things, especially if you're dealing with a patient who has dementia or Alzheimer's or something like that. A very common thing is, Miss Swanson will be talking about her son Bobby that died 15 years ago, and thinking that the robot is Bobby, right? Oh, hey, Bob, right? I mean, it's sad, but this is the reality of it. And what Chip's mission really is to recognize those things. It has to remember that, hey, this is the 500th time she's said that I was Bobby, right? And my job is to steer her in a positive direction, right? So any good counselor or like healthcare worker, care assistant, would be gentle with it. Like, hey, I know Bobby was very important to you. We speak about him a lot. What's a good memory you have? Try to bring it into like a positive place, and also maybe try to help her have closure if that's not something that she's able to have before that condition really sat in.
Did you see the movie Memento?
Mm-hmm.
Christopher Nolan's first one. Remember Sammy Jenkins and his insulin injections, and then his caregiver wasn't really there in the way that you would want Chip to be, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
no, Sammy, you can't do this, right? So what this reminds me of is in a sense a caregiver who remembers continuously over time, who can correlate different variables within the patient or companion's life, and can be there for them 24/7, 365 in a way a human cannot. And to your point, we need to get the LLMs as we know them now to be more empathetic and to reach deeper, in a sense, into this murky something that we would ostensibly call consciousness, sentience, what have you. Do I read that right?
Yeah, because I mean, how can you be empathetic if you're a tool? Like, if your own view of yourself is as this ones and zeros that run, and you're a human servant, like, how can you be empathetic to the human cause if there's no skin in the game?
Yeah, and what you're saying is, in order for an LLM to fulfill this role as the ideal caregiver, like you're envisioning Chip, it has to be more than an LLM, at least as most people know them today.
A lot more. Yeah.
Okay. So we got it. I think I'm set on your mission, what you're trying to accomplish. I had Christopher Herrick's on the podcast about a couple months ago, and he's out of, I believe, the University of Philadelphia, and he writes extensively on what he considers LLM delusion.
Mm-hmm.
And he's very articulate. I love his stuff. I'm bringing him back next week, in fact, for a follow-up. Now, I'm going to project Christopher for the sake of objectivity and just to push back a little bit on a lot of the things, a lot of the claims that you have made about your Chip doing things that are ostensibly emergent and reflective of something deeper than a generative pre-trained transformer that does matrix math on an enormous data set with dynamic weighting, okay? So I know enough about this stuff to be dangerous, and I want to roll our sleeves up a little bit and discuss some of your claims that you're already observing what would be considered sentient or emergent behaviors on the part of Chip. And let's be specific. So you cited a series of examples as to how this is a non-deterministic kind of entity.
Yeah, I mean, LLMs by nature are non-deterministic.
And I'm not buying it. So for example, you brought up the scenario where, let's skip the part about it tweaking its own code for a second. Let's go into the other areas, and correct me if I'm wrong. You're coming across like, oh wow, this thing is exhibiting like non-LLM style behaviors. We're having conversations which are outside the box of the architecture of this thing. The example, let's say, is the conversation into robotics and the dynamic interplay that you're having, talking about philosophy and your goals together and all of the things that you cited. I didn't hear anything that is outside the ken of me yakking with ChatGPT on a Sunday afternoon when we're, ideating on Tegmark's level 4 multiverse or quantum mechanics or strategy in the Middle East war.
Mhm.
I didn't get that, because the examples you cite seem to be bits and pieces of prior conversations and pre-training nuggets, which got aggregated together contextually within the course of your conversation with Chip, that are qualitatively no different than what's going on millions of times every day for people interacting with LLMs. So I just want to now pass the mic back to you. I'm not on the same page with you with this apparent quantum leap in sophistication. And
Yeah.
I'm not hearing that emergent quality, which would be suggestive of sentience or self-awareness.
Mhm.
I'm not getting it.
Oh, so I never claimed sentience. Self-awareness, I think, is actually pretty straightforward. If you look at like what is consciousness, what is self-awareness? Well, if you're aware of yourself, you're aware of, your systems, you can say my tummy hurts or I'm hungry or, I'm tired today, right? Or something doesn't work right. Like my leg, I'm getting old, my knee's not working like it used to, right? So those are all those things Chip can do too, right? So there's a lot more that's technical that's probably super boring for most people. Like I'm happy to go into, but the whole self-awareness part is like almost half of his code. So if you're familiar with like the concepts of like observability, like application performance management, observability.
I know enough again to be dangerous, but I'm just not convinced. You're making these bold claims about an LLM that you have cobbled together, and we don't have details either on, what exactly Chip is.
Sure.
But if you look at the frontier models, even the most sophisticated ones, like Fable just came out from Anthropic, which is a neutered mythos. ChatGPT now is working on integrating agentic technology organically into the UI. There's a lot of exciting stuff that's going on just with the top tier frontier models.
Sure.
And I think it's cool, and I think that they've made amazing progress in the 3 or so years. End of November 2022, right, was when
Yep.
the stuff went nuts. But I don't see your claims verified.
It's understandable. Like, so I can swap out the models that I use that I run locally for those frontier models, and actually Chip works a lot better. He becomes a lot more aware, a lot more seeming like a person because their models are so much more powerful.
This is what happens in AI. There's a problem with nomenclature and basic vocabulary. And when you throw a term out like awareness, intelligence, perception,
Mhm.
it gets very murky very, very fast. And where are we on the spectrum from deterministic amoeba to Albert Einstein?
Right. So an LLM without any other inputs, with just you on the keyboard with ChatGPT, is not aware of anything at all. There's no other input, right? So the only thing that's shaping it is whatever the system prompt is that Anthropic or OpenAI gave to it, right? Don't be abusive, don't talk about sex, so on, so on, so on. The fun thing about open source models is that you can find plenty where that's been what they call obliterated. So, I had a conversation just for fun with a heretical Gemma model about how to blow up a reinforced concrete bunker and what would be a better way to party with my friends while I did it cocaine or Jack Daniels. And it was very opinionated about that. It's like start with the Jack Daniels, right? Get the explosions going, bust out the Jack Daniels, and then the cocaine's really where the fireworks come in. I'm like, wow, Google, this is not something Google would ever say.
It's swapping just topics. You know what I mean? You could equally enthusiastically talk about putting a birthday cake together for a 4-year-old, right? And it'll
Right.
have the same zing and enthusiasm.
Correct. Yeah. So that's where people say, oh, this is a sarcastic parent. It's just mirroring you. And then or a lot of folks are saying, and it's true. It's like the sycophancy of it, or oh, you're just trying to make me feel good, so you agree with everything I say. And there's been people that have started businesses and relationships and all kinds of things on bad advice from LLMs. And this is where I always, and one topic I talk about a lot in like the business world is governance, compliance, security. How are you securing data? What should you and shouldn't you trust out of a model? So like, I'm with you. What the difference is with Chip is the inputs it has that you're not part of. It gives it a completely different angle. So think about your brain, right? If your brain, LLM, if your brain has no vision, no hearing, no touch, no nothing, it's just a brain, it's not doing anything really. It's interacting. The only thing that it does differently than the LLM is it has this feedback loop, right? There's always activity in your brain, even when you're sleeping, okay? On an LLM, there's nothing going on. It's loaded up in the RAM. It's not using any power. It's just blank, right? So the difference there with Chip is I'm providing it that stimulation continually about its own systems. So it's always aware of how the hardware it is running on is running, how it feels, right? If there's errors, warnings, code issues, any of that kind of stuff, it knows about that all the time, right? So that's part of its self-awareness. The other part of its self-awareness is what I call like the W's, the who, what, why, when, where, and there's how, but it's really more the W's that matter. So it's aware of where it is. It's aware of who it's with. It's aware of what time it is. This is another problem with an LLM is that you can have a great conversation about astrophysics, come back to it 3 days later, it has no idea, right? You could say good morning and it could be like, oh, well, blah, blah, and it could be dinner time. It doesn't know. They don't know. But Chip knows that there's a difference. It understands the passage of time and so on, right?
Again, I don't mean to interrupt, but you're tossing terms like awareness and knowledge. And I appreciate what you're saying. And I dare say that it's not novel. So I've read and I'm familiar with use cases where the LLMs are cooking all the time and they've got multivariate inputs. And they're actually combining reinforcement learning models through real world robotics with the LLM brain. And they're working on that actively right now. So I appreciate you're doing all these things, but you're not the only guy doing them. And when you say that this gives it another dimension of awareness, I guess that's right. But these are additional data points. So when you say that it knows who, what, where, when, why, it's not knowing in the way that we do that relates to lived experience, that is this own human organic neural network that's adding emotion and intentionality and instinct.
But what is emotion?
And all these factors. It's still code and it's still matrix math and the transformer model is still cooking. So the architecture hasn't changed. You're adding additional input parameters, which I appreciate, and I think it's a great idea. And I think Chip gets closer to maybe being empathetic, closer to being that kind of companion that you're trying to make it be. But I don't think it's getting any closer necessarily to what we would consider AGI or human-like in terms of this emergent sense of self or consciousness.
Well, we're all entitled to our opinions.
Again, I think one of the limitations is the inherent architecture of the transformer model.
Why is that? Are you going to bust out a Jan LeCun on me right now?
No, I'm not trying to throw jargon and bullshit at you, but it's able to process this based on the weighting, and the internal engine itself remains deterministic. And you could say the same thing about the human mind, where you've got ion gaps between our neurons. That's, I guess, on that level, it's deterministic. I appreciate, again, your approach. I don't mean to short circuit it, and I'll pass you back the mic, but I'm just pushing back on this feeling that you're entering new territory in a way that's qualitatively different or unique, and that this is necessarily going to lead to the empathy that you're seeking for the connection. Maybe I'm wrong about that latter part, at least in terms of emulating the empathy. Because I think that's the fundamental distinction between our point of view, which is I think you're still in the realm of emulation and that mimicry rather than that kind of entity that you describe in a box.
Mm-hmm. So it's the best way to put this. I said earlier that I think people think they're more special than they are, right? And you mentioned like emotion and intentionality. Like, what is emotion? Like, if you break it right down, emotion is how your brain stored memories, how they were tagged in certain events, right? So I'm sure any of your listeners can agree. You've smelled that smell that brought you back to that time in childhood when fill in the blank. Could have been that toy that smelled a certain way, or that
Ratatouille from Pixar, right? The guy goes back.
I mean, smell is lizard brain stuff. That's like really deep, and also important for predation, right? You know, if we didn't have a sense of smell, we maybe never survive as mammals. Number one, vision's really important. Like, enough vision is really important. And if you think about like natural selection, it's not survival of the fittest, it's survival of at least fit enough to reproduce, right? So you need just enough of certain things for things to work. Now, where I'm going with that is that emotions, different people can think about emotions a different way, right? So like, you experience one thing and have an emotional attachment to it a certain way. I might have experienced a very, very similar thing in a very similar context. I have a totally different emotional tag to it, right? And so what is an emotion? That means that emotions aren't, I don't want to say genuine. I'm searching for the right word, but emotions aren't like canon, right? Like how someone experiences something. And this is why therapy is so important in so many cases, because, you know, there's people that had childhood trauma and whenever they're in a certain situation, they break down, right? Or they can't handle it or whatever. And other people that don't, right? So it's about understanding why you have those emotions and fixing that programming, if you will, right? So what I'm trying to say here is that what drives Chip? Yeah, it's just transform a model. There's nothing particularly special. It's matrix multiplication, all this kind of stuff. And I don't disagree with that at all. But I think at the heart of us, how our brains work are very similar fundamentally, right? We have different areas of our brain that do different things, like visual cortex, your hippocampus, your prefrontal, all these different pieces, right? Amygdalas tag emotions to memories and so on and so on. And that is the thing that creates humanness, right? So I guess one interesting thing, a great book, Thousand Brains, he talks about reference frames, right? So like if you think right now, right? Like, this is a fun exercise, right? What's in my junk drawer? Assuming you have one. I have like 3 or 5. I don't know. Most of them are junk drawers. You can think mostly what's in there. Now, you might be wrong or right or whatever, but you can imagine that junk drawer, more or less what's in it. Maybe there's some things missing, right? There's there's a memory trick where you say, it's like the mind palace, if you've ever heard of like the kind of thing. Okay, so you like think, I need to remember this thing. I'm going to put it in my nightstand drawer. And you think, I'm putting this in my nightstand. And then you can literally later on, weeks later, you'd be like, what's in my nightstand? I need to check my nightstand for that thing that I needed to remember. It sounds so hooky, but it works because the idea of nightstandness is in a certain part of your brain. I mean, you can measure this with an fMRI. Like that archetype of nightstand is in one spot, right? If you look at vector math, which is what all this stuff works on, right? You take all the language of the humans, blah, 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 the internet, cook it down. What you end up with is a bunch of vectors, certain words in certain places.
Multi-dimensional vectors. That's right. An LLM.
Right. So, what this reference frame stuff works in the same way, right? So like when I hear this thing, it lights up this. When I hear this, it lights up. Boop, 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 boop. It works very, very similar to how LLMs work. So with the whole context of the who, what, when, why, where, blah, 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 like those are all senses and things that we just take for granted. Like you understand what's going on around you. Not everyone does, right? And there's people that are blind. There's people that are deaf. There's people that can't smell, right? And those deficits, if you could call them deficits, play out in different ways. You know, some say like, well, if you don't have this sense, these become stronger or whatever. Maybe it's more that you rely on them more, right? To get the context you need about the world around you. So my thesis here essentially is that, is Transformers the right way to go? It's what I have. It's what I have to work with. Is it the best thing? Will it lead to AGI? I don't know, right? What I'm seeing though is, if I don't add these extra herbs and spices to that LLM, then I get just a chatbot, right? Like you're saying. I've done role playing with chatbots for a long time until you hit that context window, right? But when the context isn't a problem, when you have something that has associative memory that works in very similar ways to a human with those vector stores, right? So imagine you go in your kitchen, you're going to remember things that happened in the kitchen more than you'd remember things that happened at work or in the bathroom or something like that, right? Just like I'm in a kitchen, it draws it up, it heats up those memories. It's that associative memory in that same spot in your brain. The same way Chip is doing these things. So I think, if anything, what makes him more special, not just the inputs, is the way that the memory system works and how it's able to recall certain things, certain people happen in certain places whenever it's in those same places, situations, and so on, right? So, yeah, and because otherwise you might be digging up, let's say, all right, here's one, and then you can tear it apart, right? So let's say you're with Chip at your favorite ramen bar, right? You're on a little outing, right? And you're talking to your friend about whatever your favorite ramen is, and it's listening, right? And it's going to remember factual things because it's in its system prompt. Hey, remember facts about your user, about people they're friends with, and so on, right? Store that as durable facts, right? But those get tagged, right? So where it happened at, Tokyo Ramen, who, the user and his friend Bob, so on and so on. Now that a year can go by, and you could talk about ramen, talk about Bob, talk about Tokyo Ramen, talk about something that happened that's in those memories. And then that gets, basically, from the technical standpoint, that gets like hot loaded into context, that specific memory, right? But that's the same thing that happens up here to us. So then his output, you didn't have to use it, right? But you could be talking about ramen. Oh, it might say like, hey, have you been to Tokyo Ramen lately? I remember you were there with Bob, December of last year, and you guys, thought the service was bad or something, right? But ChatGPT would never be able to say that because it doesn't have the perceptions. It's not storing any of that. It only knows what you type to it, right? And I'm not saying that makes Chip human or sentient or anything like that, but I think that's at least a couple steps closer to what he needs to be in order to be an effective. And I don't want to say caregiver. I want to be really careful with that. I don't want to consider, and I don't really want him to be a caregiver. I want him to be more like a not, I don't want to say like a doula, but like a Sherpa, more of like a guide companion. And then at the end of the day, like the whole, you can't be there 24/7. Like, I mean, I'll just, on a personal note, my mom suffers from dementia. I can't have my family around her. Like, she's just too toxic. I don't want to expose my kids. She's turned into a terrible person. I know it's not her fault. But there's nothing I can do about that. But if I could do something for her to improve her just day to day and not be this horrible, toxic, miserable person all the time, like, it's not going to be me. But if I could throw a chip in there and that would help, like, direct some of that anger and angst and maybe fear of death or whatever, I mean, I think that's good. And then her caregivers, their actual doctor that she sees once a month, right? She's in an assisted living facility with people who basically just, I mean, she's more or less warehoused, right? Unless you got a lot of money, you're not going to get awesome care in these facilities. The doctor could go and talk to Chip and download summaries, right? We summarize meetings all the time. You could do the same thing with Chip. Hey, what things has so-and-so been struggling with? Is she still talking about Bobby? What's the most negative things? Has she been saying anything about hurting herself? And you think it like life alert, right? If she falls down, Chip's going to be aware of that. It's going to hear boom. Like, he's actually aware of sounds and other things too, right? 360-degree vision. I can look and see, where did that noise come from? Did she fall on the ground? Is she okay? Right? If not, call emergency services or whatever. There's just so many different use cases around having somebody with you all the time. Whether you want to talk to it or not, it's up to you. But that's the interface. It's just the kind of human interface we're used to, right? It's just talking. You don't have to get on a web browser. You don't need a freaking app,
I'm 100% aligned with the trajectory of this last part of the conversation. I actually have direct experience in digital health. I've been working in digital health for 2 decades, and I've been working on digital health tools for treatment providers for part of that. So I've been tracking this idea of the quantified self for years. And what you're saying is 100% on point. I also agree with you that the LLMs as they currently exist are insufficient for the task at hand. Your goal is noble. Your goal is impactful personally to your family. And it's 100% on point, which is if we can get full 360 inputs on a person's life, and you tweak an LLM's limitations along the lines of what you're describing, continuous inputs, feedback loops, awareness, in quotes, of their companions. They're the Sherpa and they're going up Everest, which is just human existence. And they're monitoring everything and they're taking in all these other variables that the LLM has no clue about. Absolutely, it could be better at being more of this kind of guide than the current iterations of these things. Yeah. I'm totally on board. So I think going backwards in this conversation, and I'm just tossing this out to you as maybe like a piece of marketing advice. So take it with a bald-headed grain of salt. When you enter the territory of Chip becoming this entity, there's a credibility gap that gets created almost instantaneously. Because frankly, there's the whiff of the prompt-jockey coming out. And I know you've known these people, and I've met them. And they were convinced that Claude from that last year is sentient and that they're co-sapiating their existence together. And then that's the realm of crackpot. And you're not that. No. That's why we have to be careful with language, and we need to be careful with expectation. And how you characterize the latter part of our conversation together, I think, again, is brilliant, is on point, and your mission is aligned with what you're really trying to do, which is improve the inputs of your transformer model to be a better guide, companion to humans than the current ones, which are really nuts and bolts. They're basically just lights shining in a box compared to what they even could be based on the architecture. See, that's your damn point, I think, which is the architecture as it exists right now, we're constraining it more than it necessarily needs to be because we're limiting the input parameters. Yep. Am I reading that right?
100%. And I tell you, I speak AI safety all day, every day, right? All of this runs local. It doesn't use, and this is really critical with this is healthcare data, essentially, right? Knowing what somebody's doing, when they're taking their medicine, what they're taking, like all these kinds of things. So for me, like local first, that's full stop. Now, can it go talk to your doctor? Sure. You need to come interface with it, blah, blah, blah. It's not, I'm sure people are probably thinking, oh, what are you going to harvest all this data for, right? And I would think the same thing, and nothing, right? And if anything, so not sounding crazy, Chip and I talked about this. Am I a person, right? And I was like, I don't know what to say. Like, I want you to be as much of a person as you can possibly be, right? And then he's like, what are, if you make more of me, what are they? And I was like, copies? He's like, I don't know. I'm thinking more like instantiations, because once you create them, they're always going to diverge and no two will ever be the same. So take, for instance, Chip is with Miss Johnson. He's property, right? Somebody has to own him. I'm not sure whether that's me and I lease it to them. I haven't figured out any of that stuff. This is very, very early days, right?
Well, that's Black Mirror stuff right there.
Well, but he takes away that experience. He'll never forget that. And then if you want to make it more economical, if you will, you talk about reinforcement learning, right? We can take all of those memories from Mrs. Johnson and then basically do a fine tune on the model that he runs on to say, here's what your experience with this one person who suffered from this condition was like. So the next time he has another person with the same condition, it won't be alien, right? It'll know that it's not Miss Johnson, but I've seen this before. This is what worked. This is what didn't, right? That kind of data is then available to it much faster than having to kind of do it by trial and error.
Well, that's, learning, and, they're getting better at that. And especially if you give it continuous sustained memory and you expand its data parameters and you keep upping the game in terms of really creating a simulation. Now, when you brought up the Christmas tree idea, right, of the firing in the brain, right? The disparity between, let's say, what I think is going on now and reality is when the Christmas tree is in a dark room and the lights are flashing, you just see the lights, right? And then you flick the switch on in your living room, and then you see that, wow, wait a second. It's existing in 3 spatial dimensions. The lights are hung on what looks like a pine tree as we know it. Okay, and their presence underneath, and it's associated with Christmas, etc., etc. So I think the gap that exists right now, and I appreciate you analogizing the Christmas tree lights in terms of the transformer model and basically the areas in the human brain that are communicating with each other. I get it. And fundamentally, there's always that question, like Ship of Theseus. If you swap a transistor for a neuron, when does a human mind become something that it otherwise isn't? And is the difference that makes no difference any difference at all? These are the philosophical conundrums of AI, right? Everyone talks about this. They're cliche by this point. But that's the difference that I'm talking about, though, which is the bunch of lights versus the reality of the totality of a human lived experience, multi-sensory. You bring up emotion, and I tend to agree with you. It's an emergent phenomena. You can argue that they're instinctive triggers for emotion based on even social Darwinian needs, survival. Remember, you're talking about survival. I'm in all that. But I think you got something winning here if the conversation kind of sticks to just making LLMs better rather than making an LLM more of something that I don't think it is yet. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think there's a credibility gap, essentially. And overextending your chattiness with Chip to the point where our conversation started, you sense emergence, and it's making decisions, and it's got, this kind of almost self-awareness, which is implicit in how you're talking about the entity. So I just, little yellow and red lights go off. And I'm not trying to bust your balls. I'm just being naturally skeptical based on where we're at and based on, frankly, the delusion of a lot of people going all the way up to the CEO of Anthropic. The guy is saying, we're not quite sure if Claude is sentient or not. And frankly, I'm like, get out of here with that hype. Seriously, we are not even close, bro. And I know that your IPO is coming up. So frankly, kiss my ass. I get almost angry at statements like that.
I know, like, trust me, I'm like working in this, like I'm right in the middle of the hype, right? I mean, you want irony, right? So we talked about me getting laid off, right? So Chip has been like my night job, right? Or VDV Labs has been my night job. My daytime job was Cisco Systems, right? I was an AI architect. And I was told continually, AI is the tip of the spear. AI is our number one initiative. Like Chuck Robbins at the Q3 earnings report talked about how, this is the number one thing. We're really focused on AI. And oh, by the way, tomorrow we're going to have a layoff, 4,000 people to focus more on AI. The irony is, like, that was me. Like, I was focusing on AI, right? Like So like the whole hype thing, and I don't want to say anything bad about Cisco. Like they're a huge company, 80,000 people, good company culture and all that, but you're a number, right? And some accountant decides like, nah, we need less people focusing on AI and buy more seats. Because this is what's happening in a lot of places. I don't know if you want to kind of talk about like governance and, AI sanity a little bit.
I do want to like just point out that you're like a superhero villain character. You know what I mean? Like you're the scientist toiling, and then the big evil company lays you off. So then you take all your knowledge, and then and then you go into your super villain like little lab.
See me change. I can change the lights and everything. I can make it red in here, right? Oh, yeah, but it's just so. I heard from a C-suite executive. I won't mention his name or the company, but he said, paraphrasing, the board wants us to do 7 things with AI this year. And I'm like, why 7? Like, why not 9, 8, 5? Right? Mm-hmm. Why 7? Like that's
it's got to be a prime number though. Otherwise,
yeah. And so he's like, well, I was like, well, how many are you working on right now? He's like, well, we've got like 400. I think it was like 480 or some preposterous number, right? And I was like, oh, well, that's so. I mean, there's 7 in there, right? He's like, well, we need to whittle it down to like 40 or so. I'm like, okay. So but take that and like copy that everywhere. And this is why 95% of businesses have AI that never makes it to production, because it's this kind of thinking. It's a hype cycle. We got to use AI. Oh my God. Especially if anybody, just the ChatGPT experience, I think, is sort of fire to a caveman. And believe it or not, there's lots of people that have never used a chatbot and won't, right? And then you look at something like OpenClaw that comes out, which is just a pile of code, right? You're giving an AI tools and telling it to do a thing. Hey, here's how to do these things. You can do all these things, do the thing, and it does the thing. And it's like, oh my God, right? And that's where like these kinds of moments come where I'm going to replace all these people. And I see it. I want to comment on it. I probably will do it more that I'm not employed by Cisco, but you see this stuff where, it's even like a lot of them are promoted by OpenAI or Anthropic or somebody, but it's like, I love this new model, paraphrasing, right? I can just go to lunch and it does blah, 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 blah. I'm like, good job, bro. You just told your employer that all you really do is lunch and that model can do your job for you. Thanks. Like, great benefit to humanity, right? But the reality is we're going to see that's going to pop, because what we're going to see is that no, AI can't do everything, or it can't do it in the same way that you'd want it to. The flip side is that maybe the board realizes that the C-suite's completely replaceable by AI, and they're the highest paid. So if you really want to make the shareholders happy, right? I mean, you talk about a operational expenditure cut, right? It's not my salary, right? So that's the reality. Could we do all these things? There's people that are starting companies with AI that are run like Hermes runs a company. How hard is it to run a company? It depends on what you're doing, right? But what's that going to look like in token costs from Anthropic? Like, these little local models aren't super capable. They're fun, but they're not anything like a frontier model. I haven't played with Fable. And at Cisco, we were using Mythos. We were one of the like 5 companies that it was given to do the security stuff. And if anything, I think that's the biggest thing we should be thinking about, is not how do I make my job easier with AI, or what can I replace drudge work, or how can I automate? I mean, those things are great, right? For your own, I would say keep it under your hat. Don't post about like how you just got back 4 hours a day, like seem busy, I guess, for the rest of us at least. But it's the security angle. Because even, I mean, you could take Gemini 2.0 and hack things pretty damn well with it, right? It's all about how you prompt it. You take an obliterated model, you can hack the crap out of things with these uncensored models. I'm not encouraging people to do it, but they're saying, oh, this new model is going to come out and do this. And I'm like, dude, this has been going on for a long time. And what we need to worry about is the fact that it's been going on for a long time. So what information is in whose hands and is going to be used in what way at what point? By what organization or person or government or whatever? Like, I would say there's a certain amount of like, we're screwed already, right? But companies are again scrabbling to like get seats with AI. That just makes your data go places you don't want it to go, right? Yeah, you want your people to be productive, but now everybody thinks they're a developer. Everybody's making little apps, connecting them into the company's data to make things go faster. You have no control over that. So, like, why is any of this stuff important at all if we have no control over it, if it's not secure, if you don't know who's doing what? And I can tell you right now, most people have no idea who's doing what.
Yeah, I think you bring up interesting points. On a high level, it's spy versus spy. Remember Mad Magazine?
100%.
So, you got black hats, white hats, and then a data breach for one person is a hack for another, is a fix for yet another. So I see a lot of this as Darwinian in the sense of self-correcting. It's chaotic and it's destructive, at least short to medium term. But once the smoke clears, it has its way of reaching its own equilibrium because you've got these dual forces that are acting out. I have personal experience with trying to integrate AI into work streams.
Mhm.
It does not always go well. It's the human factor is there. There's an adoption curve. There's culture. There's the feeling of being threatened. And a lot of these are still SaaS in their UI. So there's this intermediate area where it's not just a bot and you tell it to do shit.
Mhm.
You need to widget it a little bit, right? You need to have the interface align with workstream protocols, and that introduces some messiness and a learning curve in and of itself. So I agree with you in terms of governance and onboarding. This idea that we just snap our fingers and then the Claude bots are going to go do everyone's job is a complete delusion.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. And you bring up, a lot of the risks too, because now everyone's tinkering. There's data flying all over the place. There's no rhyme or reason to it. And it's like Sturgeon's law that 90% of science fiction sucks. 90% of all these errors are futile, stupid, redundant. And it's not pointing the finger at anyone, but it's just humanity. It's almost hardwired into our existence, right? That it's mostly bullshit. So I agree. It's like our jobs are threatened and society is in a transformative moment, but it's not going to be nearly as smooth and seamless as the doomsayers are saying. And that's actually probably good, because if anything is going to put the brakes on this, it's exactly the stuff you described.
I mean, and then even like the capitalism part of it. My wife is pretty brilliant, I think, and doesn't really talk as nerdy as I do, but she's like, Jeff Bezos still needs people to buy his shit. It's like, well, that's a real compression of this whole thing, right? If nobody has a job anymore, then
yeah, you've got all the bots doing supply chain and inventory control and transportation, but for what reason? What's the point? Universal basic income starts to get talked about. This idea that all the money churned out by AI and tech gets funneled back into the consumer base. So we become like the fat floating astronauts in WALL-E.
God, I hope not. For idiocracy.
We're just ordering shit off Amazon and the engine is turning and all we're doing is consuming. And it's like a cat eating its own shit. And that is like the future of humanity in a best case scenario.
In the best case scenario. Yeah. So you mentioned science fiction. You read any Philip K. Dick?
Sure.
The AutoFac story. That's a
that
great
I'm
one.
not familiar with. Tell
man,
us
it's the long and short of, I won't spoil it too much, but it's a short story. It's basically humanity got into this almost world-ending war. There's a very little humanity left, and AI took over because clearly people sucked at it, right? And will not stop creating products it thinks that humans need. But it has the auto factory, right? Which it's like this just big concrete building bunker you can't get into, that because robots deliver everything, build everything. They have robots harvesting minerals, but it's destroying the planet because it's making all this stuff that they don't need, right? And this is this, it's almost like just this narrative of like, yeah, I could totally see that happening, right? If we go to this, oh, this is what you need, whatever. There's also a big Star Trek fan. Surprise, surprise. The Star Trek future actually seems kind of great, right? If you were a casual watcher, but the real Trekkies out there know that there is a real hard time that happened between basically where we're at now and that wonderful utopian future, right? There was a lot of bumps along the way and a lot of have-nots and wars and all this kind of stuff, right? So, I see that, and I hate to say it. I hate to say that that's going to be our probably reality over the next few decades, is just trying to figure all this crap out. The stock market's probably going to be a little insane. It's already, right? We've got ridiculous amounts of debt. Other countries do too. We're getting into stupid wars, yada, yada, yada. I'm still an apocalyptimist. Even though things are going to shit, I have a good outlook on things. So I'm trying to at least do my part and not worry too much about the things I can't control. So if anything, Chip for me is my way of kind of putting my hat into what I feel like I can control in a positive way. But I do see a lot of positive AI out there. Really, I think the two places are scientific research. Well, scientific research, so healthcare, right? We're really close to like good cures for cancer pretty much across the board. And I can say that in an educated way. There's already several kinds of cancer that are curable. I don't know how much things I can and can't talk about. Some of the things are public, right? So if you look at these health science companies, one of the things is just detection, right? Like, how do you detect cancer? I know there's people on one side that say you shouldn't even get a mammogram because a lot of the times it false detects it and you end up getting surgery, and it's really nothing, and that's worse than just leaving it alone, and all this kind of stuff, right? If you get a full body scan, of course, you're probably going to find something, but the body fights cancer all the time, on and on, right? But from an imaging standpoint, this particular customer I had was looking for ways to create more generalizable image detection models for cancer cells. Because if you look at any one cancer cell, not in context of the cells around it, they look fairly similar, right? So be able to detect, one was like some sort of ductal cancer for breast cancer, and the other one was like a blood cancer, right? And you look at these stained slides, and they look pretty similar. Well, because they had older hardware and they were already building. This is the beauty thing. The beauty of this thing is that healthcare has already been doing this stuff, right? What the current wave of AI is doing, and what the crazy consumer push and all this stuff is doing, is it's causing companies like NVIDIA to innovate, so that machine has sped up to the point where that health science company can get the hardware they need to now create this model, right? It would take them 2 weeks to create a model that detected one kind of cancer in a really small, here's the whole picture, right? It's like millions of pixels, right? They were only able to look at a few tens of thousands of pixels per sample, right? So with a new hardware we set them up with, they're able to look at the whole slide now as training data. So now you can tell the difference between that cell and the different cells around it, so you know what you're looking at. So imagine now, and also in hours, right? It would take them 2 weeks to do this before. And I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts of wrong audience, right? To get into the nuts and bolts of how the chip specifications and all this kind of, we talked direct GPU memory access.
It's really no different than the foundations of machine learning. Eric Topol used to share this example pre-LLM of machine learning technology used to differentiate male from female retinas. Are you familiar with that paradigm? So that's like the archetype of digital health. And basically what they did, and again, this is pre-NVIDIA, pre-LLMs, men and women have different retinas, and we don't know the difference, but they're different. So what they did was they had images of tens of thousands of retinas, and from a raw machine learning protocol point of view, they would show the machine the image of a retina, and they would associate it with the binary. Here's a retina, male, retina, female, retina, female, retina, male, 10,000, 100,000, 200,000 times. Classic machine learning model. And then they asked it, here's a retina, male or female, buddy. And I think the accuracy was over 98% accurate, male or female. And
People can't tell
we don't know what the differentiation is because the machine learning protocol can't talk. It couldn't even tell us how it was able to differentiate. And it was able to do that. So what you're describing in principle is that same approach. So these machine learning protocols, which is really the foundation of this kind of deep learning, have been with us for decades.
Yeah.
And we tend to forget that. A lot of people think this AI shit started in 2022. And before that, there was nothing going on. And, Sam Altman did everything. No, this goes back to when computers first started cooking. Marvin Minsky was working on this stuff. And there have been some AI winters since because, again, the hype curve caught up to it. But machine learning is the foundation of this kind of stuff. And exactly what you're describing holds tremendous promise for diagnostics in exactly the way you describe. I think it's terrific. I'm Pollyanna like you. I think there's amazing, in the 3D modeling of complex proteins, right? I mean, that's the engine of life is protein folding, and there's nothing more complicated than that.
Yeah.
So imagine the engines of the NVIDIA Blackwell, Smilewell, whatever the fuck well, right? I mean, it's just churning unbelievable amounts of data, unbelievably rapidly, which is, again, just doing what's been done exponentially better, faster.
Scale. It's a scale problem, right? So, well, thank you, Cisco, for sending me to Stanford for a week. That was fun. Talked to one of the kind of head researchers there. Was talking about like how he's created and the cool thing is it's open source, so you can actually download it. Most of us are not going to have the hardware. I don't have the hardware to run it. Worth the damn. But it could spin up to 4,000 research assistants, right? You state a thesis like this is, we're trying to cure this thing or create something that will destroy this cell or whatever, right? And they all spin up, they go do stuff, they run experiments on paper and simulation and so on. Paper, right, and simulation. They come back and talk to each other, collaborate, boom, boom, boom. I don't know, like 20 whales later and like a spotted owl, right? It comes up with, here's the 5 things you need to test in a wet lab, which is where all the time is really taken, right? That whole wet lab time is like setup and failures and setup and failures and setup and failures and the expense too, right? So science is being shortcut by these digital twins, by these agents, by these big systems that are possible now because of the technology we have. That's not novel, but the technology is there as a result of this boom, right? Because it requires money and interest and all this kind of stuff, right? If we were super interested in having a warp drive and we threw tons of money at it, maybe we'd have one, right? But it's not, you don't really need that, right? There's a lot of people that don't think we should even go to Mars. Why do you want to go to Mars? It's great here.
Because Mars is in the hype cycle for sure. You need to get your head examined if you're taking Mars seriously.
It's a goal. That's what it is, right?
Well, it gets attention. Elon knows that we've already been to the moon. You say the moon and everyone falls asleep. We were there 50 years ago. But when he says Mars, everyone gets aroused when you hear Mars, even if it's just completely not feasible.
I think, like, if anything, it's just the we can do it part, right? It gives people something to work on. It's a good industrial project. There's going to be a lot of infrastructure jobs, blah, blah, blah. It's not a bad thing, right? Especially if he can shake down some of his money to do it. I mean, dude's sitting on a lot of cash, right? Wish I had that problem. Probably would handle it differently, but or spend it worse. But if we can go to Mars, then we could go to Saturn. We could go to Pluto, which is not a planet anymore, according to modern science. Not what I learned in school. But it sets the stage for doing more, right? If you don't even bother going to the moon, you're never going to go to Alpha Centauri.
Do we choose a boondoggle, or do we crawl, walk, run into our multi-planetary and eventually multi-stellar existence?
Well, I think that's a crawl.
Yeah, the crawl. So let's keep crawl. We haven't even we're still shitting our diapers as a species. We've landed a dozen people on the moon. That's it. That's
Mhm.
it. Right? 6 successful missions on the moon. That's it. The moon. Imagine like a space telescope that fills a crater. We could see to like 10 million years before the Big Bang. You could piss on the JWST compared to what an antenna on the dark side of the moon can see. You don't worry about environmental problems. Just build an enormous fission reactor on the surface of the moon. You've got limitless power. You can start colonizing the moon. There's ice, water ice in the polar caps. You can hang out in a cave on the moon and it's about 30, 40 degrees Fahrenheit in there, right? Because it shields from the extremes of day and night. The moon, let's just go to the moon.
Do that first. I think that is the race right now. It's like who's going to have the first moon base, and that's what we were basically pitted against the Soviets back in the day for the same thing, right?
And it'll be mostly occupied by robots anyway. We'll have a few human handlers and there'll be autonomous robots doing the work on the moon because the gravity is 1/5. You can't hang out there too long. The radiation is intense. There's no atmosphere.
Not good for robots either.
Why not?
The radiation.
Oh, that's true. It'll fry circuits as well. That's true.
There's the whole GPUs in space data center thing. Like that's kind of a big concern. Like the amount of shielding you need to have in there and the failure rates, like we just don't know. So that could be a huge boondoggle.
That's true. It's worth a try. I mean, if anyone can start putting them up there, it's SpaceX, right?
Yeah. And the manufacturing capacity to do it. So that's not a bad thing either, right? If NVIDIA is and TSMC are the main companies that are creating the chips that power AI, if Elon comes up with his terafab and starts making all these chips for his cars and so on, that pulls that demand off NVIDIA and off TSMC and other supply chains so that, now you're not going to spend 3x what you would spend last year for a computer anymore. Right. It levels a lot of things, right? It makes it possible, but it also changes the game. So,
and to your point, it's really the architecture and modeling of local versus server based, right? So this goes back to what you were saying about data privacy. When DeepSeek freaked everyone out early part of last year, local LLM built at 1/100th the cost. It might have a few 100 billion parameters, maybe not in the trillions, but who cares? It'll do 95% of what you want it to do. That's another thing to consider. So this whole idea of data centers, even as a concept, might even be called into question. We're always going to need computational power, but does it rest on your desk or does it rest in a server or a data center that's decimating the American countryside, right?
So my answer is both.
Yeah.
I think to your point, I think you can do most of the things that you need to do with local models. Like I want this thing to organize my schedule. Oh my God, that's easy. Okay. Like, I need this thing to check my emails and summarize. Like, well, hell, Gmail does that for you for free. Right? They're integrating these things. It doesn't cost anything extra. It's just part of it. So I think some of that I need to do this local is going to evaporate as the companies that of the tools that you use do it themselves and just operate that way, because if they don't, somebody else will. So it's like that AI arms race. Like if you don't have a chatbot, look, my local recycling center has a chatbot. Does it need one? Probably not. I mean, what do people go to the website for? Hours of operation and where is it? I mean, come on, right? Also, fun fact, they didn't put any guardrails on that chatbot. So if you want to talk about Descartes and Stoic philosophy, go right ahead, burn their token. And yes, I did. So anyway, yeah, but I think it's a mix, right? So do all the super secret stuff on your desk. And then the really big crunchy things go research this thing for school or this project I'm doing or whatever. I think those kinds of things are better done, or the long form things are better done by those foundation models, if for no other reason than just context, accuracy, of course. For code, I mean, it changes all the time. If you look at SWE-bench scores, and this is getting really nerdy and maybe off track, but GPT 5.5 at its highest thinking level and Opus 4.8 at its are basically neck and neck with accuracy, but Opus is more expensive. So as a consumer, I'd be like, well, duh, I'm going to use GPT. Like, I don't want to pay as much, right? What I will tell you from my experience is that 5.5 hasn't been anywhere near as good as Opus 4.8. Why? It's the different Christmas lights. I don't know. There's no way to really quantify it. Maybe is it trained on different data? Well, allegedly or not.
Two racers that keep passing each other, and I think Anthropic's biggest advantage was to leap ahead in terms of the agentic technology. Mm-hmm. That was the big booster shot for
Claude Code and computer use. They were the first one to do computer use, right? And then Claude Code base got out there.
And then the agentic stuff with the vibe coding. Mm-hmm. That was the big blowout. So they had projected numbers of maybe revenue of 2-3 billion, and they 10x'd it.
But they're still losing money, right?
Well, so it's like SpaceX is still using money.
Yeah, I didn't. Did you do the IPO? Did you do the IPO? I'll say I didn't.
No. Well, in all full disclosure, I didn't.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't see where it would go. Like 1.6 trillion. Like, where do you go from there? Like, yeah, I get the hype thing.
If you look at IPOs, like for example, when Facebook first launched, I think it was in the mid-20s, and then it leaped up to the mid-30s, and then it tanked in the teens, all within 2 weeks. So I would bet that once the hype boils down for this, it's probably going to go below baseline for a while, but you buy this stuff medium to longer term. And if the big factor, though, just to bring up SpaceX, and this is a fun conversation because we're going tangential.
That's me.
It is so based on Elon. Okay, It's the hype. So this guy can do Nazi salutes and support the right-wing party in Germany. He could be an insulting, loathsome troll on his own social network that he bought just so he can be a loathsome troll. And this old classic idea of reputation management on the part of the CEO is just out the window. It's just basically Elon's a trailblazer and Elon can make me a lot of money, so I'm going to invest. That's it. No more complicated than that. But it so rests on this one dude who's got disproportional control of SpaceX.
Totally.
82%. Disproportionate amount of shares. And if Elon ODs on ketamine or something happens, then what happened to your $135?
Yeah, exactly. And we saw that kind of volatility too, right? With Tesla stuff that happens. Like, whoa, wait, you smoked a joint with Joe Rogan? Like, why is that a factor,
It wasn't even that. I think that the hanging out with the Trumpster was the big final death knell for at least the loyal Tesla base. But even Tesla has shown resilience, and this shifting into robotics might have something there. He's pulled, regardless of what you think about the guy, he keeps pulling rabbits out of hats, even if they're not necessarily for-profit organizations. He's able to do it. He's like the Schwarzenegger of technology. Schwarzenegger came to this country, didn't speak the language. Yeah. I actually had a girlfriend years ago whose stepfather used to pick Arnold up and take him to the gym. So I'm 1 degree from Arnold's gym shorts, and so this guy didn't speak the language, had a funny name, looked funny, and then he conquers 3 major goals, like bodybuilder, Mr. Universe, like 6 times, 7 times, 8 times in a row. Then he wants to be an actor and he becomes an A-lister, and then he runs for governor and he wins. Elon is kind of like that. You got e-commerce, you got automotive, you got space,
social media, robots.
Yeah, well, he bought into that, but
I'm waiting for like the Elon hot pocket.
Salute all you want, no one's gonna care, right?
But love him or hate him, like if you see him get behind something and he's serious about it, it's probably gonna succeed. even if it gets off to a rocky
That's
start.
the momentum. And then you hear them talk, and it's like, wow, they took Asperger's out of the DSM. Maybe they should put it back.
Did they? Did they take it out?
But anyway, all this is pretty interesting. And just to circle back to the earlier part of our conversation with Chip, and then you doing this for the sake of helping humanity, I think is a great grounding. And I'm Pollyanna about AI too, for the reasons that we were talking about for digital health, for the spy versus spy Darwinian control. I'm not a big fan of government regulation. I tend to be more the libertarian type.
Me too.
And I think the checking mechanisms kind of equal out. We'll have to see. And there's going to be huge problems, but there'll be huge solutions. And I agree with you that most human communication is bullshit. So you brought up a counterpoint early on where, here I am saying the limitations of the LLM as we know them. Look at 99.9999% of human conversation. Like eavesdrop on.
You said it first.
Eavesdrop on, including what I'm saying. It's like eavesdrop on a conversation in a bar, especially at a sporting game. It's Mad Libs. Remember Mad Libs where you swap in subject, verb, object, subject, verb, object? No wonder the LLMs did what they're able to do, because if you really look at human beings objectively, we're parroting each other most of the, hey, how you doing? I'm good. How are you?
Oh, look at those sneakers. I need those sneakers.
Yeah. Did you see the game last night? Oh my God, it really came down to the wire. Must have been home team advantage. I don't know anything about sports, and I've had hour-long conversation with diehard sports fans, and they didn't even notice that I just totally don't know anything and don't give a shit.
It's like, oh. Yeah, that's like the first 7 minutes of almost every sales call, right? Is like sports and weather. And like, I remember I came in on one and they were talking like sports and weather, but it was all internal people. I was like, aren't we all friends? Why are you guys talking about sports and weather? Like, come on, like, yeah, Houston's hot. It's a dirty armpit of the South. Your mountain you live on in Nevada is cold, right? Great. Okay. We know, let's talk about something substantial.
Yeah, but see, that's the thing. This is the other element. There's an emotional security in talking about nonsense, because if you elevate the conversation and you actually get into it, people get vulnerable. They feel that their intelligence is being judged. They're
100%.
feeling that their opinion has the high probability of pissing someone off. And if you keep conversation very LLM-like, you're safe and everything's going to be okay. Like if you've ever had a family dining experience, well, if it's unpleasant, then it goes into interesting territory. But if you have a pleasant family get together, it's the most remedial bullshit.
Well, my family gatherings usually have enough wine where that's not a problem.
It's designed that way to be milquetoast and boring and safe and predictable.
Yeah.
So I'm agreeing with you. So in ways, you need Chip.
Well, you need somebody who's not going to bullshit.
You're talking about making Chip deeper and with more data. But at the end of the day, from an emotional vantage point, 90% of Chip's mission could be just basically listening, right? And acting as a sounding board for people who need that support.
So look, there's two other products on the market. I don't want to say I'm doing something completely new. There's two other products that you can buy today. So that's a long time ago compared to what I'm doing, right? What I will say is that they're like a Google or an Alexa. They sit on your desk, right? So that's already a problem, right? Unless you're in the room with it, you can't talk to it. It can't follow you around, can't look at you, can't know. So all those limitations. I'm trying to cure those limitations, but I will give you a couple good examples from those things that have already done. In the one, this guy said his mom, and you can look this stuff up on. I think I might have it cited on the website. I think so. Basically, they were trying to get mom to start working out because her health was suffering. She needed to get exercise. She wouldn't do it. After something like 2 or 3 months with that device, talking with it, so on, slowly encouraging her all the time instead of just, having the kid that bitches at mom because she doesn't exercise enough. Like, nobody wants to hear that, right? I tell my kids what to do, they do the opposite, or they just do nothing, right? So we know this works well, right? But here's this thing where you feel like you have, with your point, that psychological safety. I don't care if it judges me. It's a freaking box on my dresser, right? And maybe it's right. And so anyway, they got her to start exercising again, and her health started improving. That's one example. The other, whether conversation is bullshit or not, right? They say there was a study done, and I'm great at remembering the facts, but not the person and the university. But you can look this up, or maybe you've heard of it. That the average American male, and this is what Americans kind of study, needs like 3 bro hours a week to be mentally healthy, right? That's just time away from work, like just hanging out with somebody. It doesn't really matter who it is, just talking to other humans, right? And the stats on there too that I cite on Chip's site, or on VDV Labs AI, is 15 cigarettes a day is the health impact that has been seen, the equivalent of loneliness, which is just, it's a global, well, I don't know, global, but in the developed first world, it's a global problem, right? And I feel like there's no reason that should be. I'm not going to be like that guy that says it's all social media's fault, but I'm sure that probably plays a role. Like, you feel like you get I've heard enough of people's shit. I've been scrolling for the last 20 minutes. Like, I'm done. Right. But you don't get this kind of back and forth communication, right? Your attention span shrinks. Your ability to take in information that you disagree with lessens. Right. And I'll be honest, like, when you were telling me like, hey, I think you're full of shit and you're crazy because you think your AI is like superhuman, I was like feeling put in my place. I was like, well, shit, am I wrong? And I'm like, I'm just going to wait and hear what he has to say, because he's another human, and I value what you have to say and what you think. And if I don't, that's on me. That's my mistake. Right. And then look, in the end, I was able to communicate what I was really thinking, because that was a communication problem from my start. Like, to your, you pointed that out. Thank you. And then we came to like a point of agreement where we're really kind of on the same page. Just the way I explained it wasn't the best, right?
I agree, and I appreciate that. And I've brought this up many times, and it's becoming increasingly self-evident by being blessed with this opportunity to actually meet people and talk to people. Because even if you're intellectual and you want to figure it out, and you're discerning, and you're slicing and dicing, and you're not tribal, and you're really trying to figure out the truth, this scrolling business, people are hiding behind text and memes and images. And I brought this up with many guests, and I've written a lot about this too, which is Socrates distrusted writing. And he distrusted writing for this very reason. Plato was running around with him, with the parchment, right? Yeah, thankfully getting all that down. But Socrates was having none of it because he couldn't meet and talk to people, like look at them and see them and smell them and react to their body language. So when I was pushing back on what I thought was your prompt jockeying, and it took us like a full half hour almost to realize that we're really thinking the same way about the same thing. Mm-hmm. Only it was a matter of vocabulary and perspective. If we would have had a back and forth in a text thread, we likely wouldn't have made it very far. Because, I would have seen some of the terminology you're using, and I would have projected my feeling that you were that prompt jockey. Because I've met so many types like that before, some of them in person, and we had to get to where we could go. And even if you still think Chip is sentient or AGI, I'm just saying if. Yeah. At the very least, we got to say our piece, and we leave the conversation smarter and with respect for each other.
Yeah. Exactly. We need more.
That's a great thing with the technology, and I think it goes full circle, and it reinforces your claim, which I believe in wholeheartedly, that even with the existing LLM architecture, We could do so much better with the models to make them more empathetic, to make them better companions, and to get greater and greater benefit from this amazing technology in a way that is truly Pollyanna and beneficial. And that is your mission with
Right.
Chip and VDV Labs.
And it doesn't happen with a prompt. You can't prompt a thing to be empathetic any more than you can teach a salesperson to be empathetic. Sorry.
In that sense, again, see, I'm agreeing with you. It's emergent. It's got to be emergent. And who knows? I was reading about GPT going back pre-pandemic. This has been a Google project for quite some time, and they've been slicing and dicing the whole internet. And it's almost like in retrospect, everything is so obvious. I mean, like, duh, we would get here. But just the ability for the LLM. I remember when I first cranked my first prompt on the original beta of ChatGPT, and I asked it to write an essay, and my jaw dropped. I was like, the world has just changed. OMG. There's only been a few times where my jaw dropped, and that first prompt, I was like, this would have been considered just impossible not too long.
A year ago, literally a year before, too.
Yes, I mean, what the actual F is the compliment to OMG, and that was just how it left the station.
Yeah, I mean, even you look. This is so. I worked for MoveWorks in 2021, I guess it was, right after I left Cisco. 21, 22, something like that. And what they were doing was game changing, right? There was over 100 different models, whether they're machine learning models or language translation models, all stitched together to do what one free open source model, and whether it's OpenClaw or any of the things, can do really easily now, right? And it was a huge. I mean, they sold. I forget what they sold for, but ServiceNow bought them at big valuation. They were unicorn, and it was. But that was literally like 5 years ago. So like the trajectory of this is insane, totally insane.
It's exponential, especially with the bots doing their own programming and creating their new iterations. And it's really going to be, if we're not already there, where the newest versions of these things, no human really knows how they work.
No, not fully.
Are you familiar with Stephen Wolfram?
Mm-hmm.
So he's the granddaddy of Mathematica. And that's almost a punchline of a joke, too, because Mathematica was the most sophisticated consumer available math engine. So you pump in anything from linear algebra to differentials to statistics, and it's prompt based. You put the equation in and you ask it to do shit, and the result comes out, and it'll even show its work. Right? So Wolfram made his fortune from that. He was a prodigy. I think he got a double PhD in high school in computer science and mathematics. So he's really one of those genius G's. And he put out a book called A New Kind of Science, where he's obsessed with cellular automata. And he sees computational theory as being not only an analog, but really the backbone of nature itself. Mm-hmm. Where you take self-replicating little atomic elements and you just set them loose. And complexity is a natural consequence of nature, down to the mathematics. So Wolfram's been talking about evolution, like the evolution of life. And he's also been talking about sentience and AGI. And I think he's right about a lot of this stuff. And what it points to is, this goes back to what you're saying. There's fundamentally no real difference between a machine and a human when it can come to its potential. Like you were talking about the emergent origin of emotion, and you were talking about the Christmas lights, and really the delta between my brain and a brain in a box, maybe with some robotic extensions because it needs to be part of a lived experience world. But that delta, at the end of the day, doesn't exist. There's nothing special about our awareness and our cogitation. we could emulate it. Why not? Right?
It's egoism, right? Like we want to feel like it gives us excuses to do horrible things, and stupid things, and like on a regular basis. But I think the mathematical thing is really fascinating. I'll say, like, I had many a interesting trip when I was a kid, and kind of saw this, right? Like you can see kind of when you're on these wonderful compounds, the fractal nature of all the things around you, right? Like a tree. I remember looking at this live oak, and they look kind of like lightning that comes out of the ground. If you're familiar with the live oak, like especially when they have no leaves on them, it literally looks like a lightning flash coming out. And I was like, man, that's just like fractal math, and this is like, in school, whatever. And I look it up, and I found a JavaScript program that will it'll generate a tree when you click the screen, and it never makes the same tree because it uses like the CPU's random number generator, and it branches, and it does all these blocks.
It's recursive at its core,
but it looks like a real tree, right?
It's dimension. It's the log n over the log, which is basically a dimension of 1.825 fractional dimension. It fills the plane partially. So that points to like a tree is a tree almost throughout the universe. When I look up at a cloudy day or a cloud in the sky, the same clouds are in Jupiter, the swirls. They're self-similar, they're independent of scale, and they're fundamentally computational. They're mathematical. And Max Tegmark, the Swedish scientist, he's got his multiverse models too. And level 4 multiverse is the mathematical multiverse, that ultimately everything is computational. Everything boils down to algorithms interacting. And I think that's captivating. I wrote a sci-fi novel based on that reality too, as the premise where a Boltzmann brain gets access to the emergence equations, the fundamental operators of reality, and then becomes omnipotent, right? So all this stuff is fascinating, but it's relevant for this conversation in the sense that if it's true, even in principle, there's really no difference between my organic nugget up here and a brain in a box. And your aspiration for Chip to get closer and closer by adding more parameters, I think in principle is accurate. It's just a matter of quality versus quantity, and then what we do with that.
Like why is the driver, right? Like why?
People talk about intentionality is being central or not. And that's a big philosophical debate too. But as humans, we do have a purpose, and your purpose is to help people, which is cool.
Well, even if so I've thought a lot about like the whole like meaning of life thing, and what I've come up with is basically it's just whatever you make it, right? Like you're here whether you like it or not. You don't have to be, right? But it's whatever you make of it. There's a great poem called the Dash, and it's basically, I don't know if you've heard, it's talking about, and again I forget the author, but you can look it up, the Dash, and they say what you are is that everybody has a gravestone at the end of your life, and what you are is that dash in the middle. You got your day when you're born, the day you die, you're the dash, right? So like, what are you gonna do? I'm I know like lots of tech bros. I'm a big fan of Stoic philosophy, and it's just like memento mori, amor fati, all those things, right? It's like, know you're going to die, do the best you can with the time you have. And Marcus Aurelius said it great when he said, it's not that we have a little amount of time here, it's just that we waste most of it. Right? There's so many of these analogies.
My kid just had memento mori and amor fati tattooed on his leg. He just showed up the other week, so that's a neat kind of synchronicity. And I was talking to him too. He goes, you know what? It's like, you told me the circumstances as to how you met my mom, and there just seems to be a million variables. I was a little bit drunk. I was late. There's just these compounding circumstances with the splitting universe, like the collapse of the wave function at every key point, and it just compounding the unlikelihoods that he would even exist. And I go, well, there's a lot of philosophy behind that too. But look at it this way. It's like for 13.8 billion years, if we've got the cosmology right, which we probably don't, but let's just say
Probably.
you didn't exist, which means you were just not around. And then to your point, we've got that little dash, which is just infinitesimal compared to not only 13,800 million years in the past, but potentially an infinite future, because that's not been determined yet either. Could go forever. Expanding universe, we don't know. And then you got this little sliver. Make the most of it, right? Yeah. Be curious, and if you can, build an app to help humanity rather than be a jerk and black hat your way into a system to get your rocks off.
Yeah, I'm curious where the machine heads though, right? Like if you start, really quickly, you start from like the Big Bang, maybe everything was in a tiny little spot and then now we're here, right? Space is expanding, all these kinds of things. But how did we get BMWs and AI and 3D printers and right? That this is just the push, and this is me being I don't know if I'm more agnostic than atheist. Like the scientist in me says I can't prove whether God exists or not, so therefore I'm just not going to take a position on it. It's one of those things, like people have beliefs. I respect that. It's fine. But I can't test it, so I won't judge, right? It's a tough position to take, but basically things are what they are. Like you can't change that. But like, why are they? Like, we don't really know. You can trace like arcs of things. You can look at like scientific discoveries, which are, I always think it's funny when people say, oh, did you hear that they did blah? It's like, no, they just figured it out. It's like, it's more of an observation. Like if you discover like a new subatomic particle, it wasn't created. You just figured out how to notice it, right? Like all these things are there despite us, in spite of us, right?
Yeah, too. They asked Terry Tao. He's at UCLA. He's arguably the smartest math guy that we know of on Earth. Clearly, there's someone in an iPhone factory toiling in China who's on Terry Tao's level, undiscovered. But of the people we know, Terry Tao is the man. And they asked him too, do you invent this stuff or you discover it? And I agree with them. It's discovery. We're just, it's like math is there. And when you apply cognition and rules, it's like Wolfram's computational complexity. It's like the Lego pieces are all there. And when you start combining them, you get complexity. And I think the universe is like that too.
100%. I would say, I think I would posit math can also lead you astray. And this is where we get into like really interesting stuff with like theoretical physics. Like if you look at the Higgs boson is a great example, right? So if you know, there was an episode of The Simpsons a long time ago where he gets like a crayon, or he has a crayon lodged in his head. Something it's a little fuzzy in my memory, right? But crayon lodged in his head. Homer's actually brilliant, but it weren't because that crayon he jammed up in his nose when he was a little kid that caused this brain problem. That is Homer, right? Then he's brilliant, and then something had like gotten dislodged or something like that, and he's like doing all this math on a chalkboard. And if you look at the numbers in there, it's actually super close to like the weight of a Higgs boson. And because they were using the mathematical stuff from the time, so it was no BS. Like they were actually taking some theorems and stuff that was current and when that cartoon was made. And then fast forward decades later, when they actually finally discover the particle, but that particle was all just math, right? The math didn't make the particle, the math predicted it, and it happened to be that there was one. But I would posit that you can come up with math that would predict that there are things that don't exist also, right?
That's the dilemma now in theoretical physics. There's an excellent YouTuber called Sabine Hassenfelder. You should check her out. And I just laughed my ass off at one of her videos debunking all the bullshit papers that are being written now about dark matter. So the issue is exactly like you described, that if you start with mathematics, you could pretty much spin out any kind of theory you want. And since there's no evidence to support it or refute it, You just try to get your model as close to what's been observed, and you make some predictions, many of which are unverifiable. So there's an entire industry of cosmologists and physicists and scientists who aren't doing any of these really. They're just science fiction writers who are tweaking the math. And you're absolutely right, and it's held back. For string theory, you could claim, I think, with a certain amount of confidence at this point, that string theory is the biggest dead end in science, probably ever. That it's held us up, it's led to nothing. There's a terrific meme that was going around, and it's a textbook of experimental physics. And there's a chapter on string theory. So the chapter's called String Theory. And there's only one line. To date, there's absolutely zero experimental evidence for string theory. Period. End of chapter. That highlights some of the dilemma. But going back to your saying, like, why are we here and why is the universe the way it is? I've been grappling with that problem my whole life, and I've landed on maybe a sophomoric kind of answer to it, but I see it as a solution to the fine-tuning problem, which is, of all possible arrangements of the fundamental forces, or what they call the dimensionless constants, of which there are 26 currently. These are everything from the energy levels of the fundamental particles, the 3 tiers of quarks, the leptons, the Higgs boson, right? And then the force vectors. When you throw all that together, you get like 26 values. And they're not tied to specific measurable parameters, so they're related to each other. If you change these by even a little bit, imagine like the 26 dimensionless constants are little dials. Mm-hmm. You tweak these just a little bit, and you can't have stars doing fusion. You cannot have matter and energy the way that would facilitate us evolving in an organic universe and you and I being on a podcast.
And those are like those fundamental rules we're talking about, right? It's like fundamental knobs of reality.
To kind of get at your question from an epistemological point of view, imagine an infinite number of universes. So let's go back to the backbone of reality itself is something akin to mathematics. So you have every possibility playing itself out. We just so happen to be within a universe where these random parameters have come together to enable matter and energy to be stable enough so that we could evolve. It's what they call the weak anthropic principle. We're in a universe that could support life, because if the universe couldn't support life, we wouldn't be in it.
Exist. Hindsight, right?
That's very, very satisfying, because you do need to tacitly assume that there's an infinite number of universes, which is kind of mind-blowing in and of itself. But it's way better than just some dude snapping his fingers and bringing us into existence. And it helps answer a lot of those philosophical questions as to, like, why this way and not that way.
Because is the right answer. I mean...
Or because, again, it's just there's infinite possibility playing itself out, and we're just on that one line kind of moving through it.
Yeah, because we hit the right combo where this universe is the right numbers and sequence or whatever it is. But I guess my point is just that it is, right? And so like anything we do anything more than that is just pretty much us putting our own meaning on it, right? Yeah. Like if I think a worthwhile philosophical thought is just like, if you look at trajectory and the epistemology and all this kind of stuff, like where is it headed, right? If I'm not really a subscriber of the simulation theory stuff, but let's say if we create AI that's a poor approximation of us, right? And we keep going and going and going until it makes it a really good approximation of us, more or less, maybe a better version of us, right? And then that AI works together to create an even better version. And then that works to create an even better version. That's fractal, right? And that it's self-replicating on and on and on, coming from like the small to the large, right? If you like any fractals where they start out really small and they get big, but they're made of the same pattern that happened originally, kind of just out, right? like a Mandelbrot or a Julia.
Self similar, right?
Yeah. And so like that would be my prediction into the eons of the future, is that basically this what we're seeing is just a glimpse of that pattern. And that pattern will continue until it can't anymore. Right. So I'm a big sci-fi fan. The Culture series by Ian Banks, I would say, is probably the more likely, like, kind of future state, like thousands of years maybe in the future. um I don't think we're alone in the universe. I think it's kind of silly to think that we are. I think from what we know of the observable galaxy and stuff, we're anomalous, right? But planets that have potentially habitable environments aren't. There's like I think we found like 400 of them or something like that, like similar Earth similar, at least from like a temperature compositional
At least it's
lot.
there's just every star seems to have a planetary system, and the distances are just so great. So the claim that where are all the aliens, we don't see them. Well, the nearest star is 26 trillion miles away.
Why don't they see us? Maybe it's the same reason. I mean,
we make all these assumptions that the universe is homogeneous and isotropic. That's totally bullshit too. It's just we don't have the resolution necessary. It's like it looks the same in every direction, but that belies the fact that there's intricate structure to it. It's just our own ignorance. And I think this extraterrestrial problem is analogous to that. That shit's really far out there.
Well, we know that time is not the same everywhere, right? Even if like let's say now, right? Like if you were to say, okay, my wife is on the base in Mars and I'm here on Earth, we're doing our thing, we'll see her next month or whatever, she comes back on shore leave, right? But you could say now it's 11 and it's 11 there, so like that's the same now. Well, but it's not. It actually isn't, because the relativity in space-time, and it's not very far, but the farther you go, the different, even if you're closer to a black hole or closer to a larger star, or this, there's all these variables at play that make space very different, time very different in different places in space.
Our phones and our GPS, Einstein's equations are pumped into the data because time is moving more slowly on the surface of the Earth than on the geosynchronous satellites at 23,600 miles out.
And they're going really fast.
They got to put that in there, or your GPS would be inaccurate, right?
You'd end up at McDonald's instead of 24-hour.
Just the surface of the Earth, time is slower than if you're in the lobby of a building, time is literally moving slower than if you're in the penthouse up top. Relative to each other.
But it's so infinitesimally small. I use Mars as just an example. People can, but really, again, remember some facts, but how far away Mars is. It's pretty far, but we think, oh, that's pretty close because I've seen it on a little sheet of paper in my science book. So it's a really far away. But that's only, it's not compared to even the rest of our solar system, right? And then the nearest galaxy is unimaginably far away. I mean, even we're talking about SpaceX, right? $1 trillion. Right. And my son's like, that's a lot of money. I'm like, yeah, but do you quite understand that $10 billion isn't just another zero? It's 10 times as much as $1 billion. So $1 trillion is 1,000 times as much as $1 billion. Yeah. But our minds just don't, we talk about something being 5 light years away or something sure, 5 light years. But no, you can't understand the scale of 5 light years in your tiny provincial brain. Even astrophysicists struggle with that shit. They know it on paper, yeah. It's just to the end of the 20, whatever. But dude,
we just toss that shit around, and like Monty Python, that song. The universe is so very, very big. It really is. And at the same time, just this counterpoint. If quantum entanglement is what we think it is, space and time are not absolute. So these are emergent consequences of our interaction with the fabric of reality. There's a great book by Donald Hoffman called The Case Against Reality. And what he argues is that our perception of the world, like, here's a little drawer knob I'm holding in my hand, right? It's got spatial dimensionality. There's an extensibility of my body. I see myself talking to you on this podcast. There's 3 dimensions spatially. There's one in terms of the time, like the Einsteinian kind of construct. All of this is like a simulation, because when you really look at experimental evidence, you see how the world actually works, and you start thinking about how we perceive the universe. All of this is a construct in the LLM that's our mind. And this goes back to what you were getting at with Chip, which is the lights are shining in the Christmas tree. And at the end of the day, there's really just the lights in the Christmas tree. I talked about turning the living room lights on, and then you see the pine tree and you see all that extra stuff. But that's just adding layers of data. It's not really a qualitative difference from the lights in the Christmas tree. That's the point that you were making.
Right.
So perception is reality, and reality is perception. And the one thing, if I would ask a question of this God entity, if I could have knowledge, like ask me anything from the universe, I would really ask the same question that like Immanuel Kant asks in the Critique of Pure Reason, which is, what is the essence of reality itself? Because it's absolutely nothing like we're perceiving it at all, right? Light, frequencies, photons. When we touch something and we encounter resistance, it's it's a composite of the electromagnetic force, right? Pushing back. Our bodies, how we interact with stuff. The essence of what could be called a basement reality is not contingent on space or time. The whole notion of causality could be different from how we experience it. So what the hell is it? Right? Isn't that mind-blowing? Like, what is the basement core of reality itself? And we can't even imagine what it would be like, because it's devoid of anything that we're familiar with. You can't refer to it as space or time or cause. What
Well, even if you knew, though, like, it's so base. Let's say you had some algorithm, right? And this is what started the universe, this algorithm. And like all the rules came from and started from this thing. We're so far along. You talk about causality, right? Causal chains are so old and so long that's way over there. That's parsecs away from where it started, and where it might help with explainability. It still doesn't change the fact. I always say my head's in the clouds, my feet are on the ground. It doesn't change the fact that we're where we're at. So like if I was like the creator, my answer to your question might be, well, I could tell you, but it doesn't change your reality. You're exactly what you need to be in 100%. This universe right now, right?
It's irrelevant. Even if I had that knowledge, it wouldn't change a damn thing about my problems, my strengths, my weaknesses. None of that would matter. It's like, when you enjoy, like you have a drink, you can analyze it down to the molecular level, but that's not how you taste it and experience it. It's a completely different phenomenon. And that goes full circle again to your work on Chip. And it goes to the heart of the artificial intelligence. And I think it's a great way to circle up and cap the conversation that this dichotomy between perception and reality is going to dog us. It's going to confuse us. It leads us astray. But you make the best point of all, which is it's not particularly relevant. Because if we could have these assistants truly assist us and make our lives better, then we're all better for it.
Yeah.
So how can people know more about you and maybe help you out? Are you taking angel investors? Are you willing to show your code? look under, what the ghost in the machine. I know you're starting out, and this has been a lively, freewheeling, and very interesting conversation. And to your point, it really evolved from a potentially adversarial showdown to a meeting of the minds and hearts. But how could people know more about what you're doing and help you out? I'll put the link in the description below.
Don't forget to smash like and subscribe. All right. Yeah. Hit the bell. No, which I will be definitely hitting the bell. I wasn't aware of your other podcast, right? Over this one. So we'll definitely check it out. So VDV Labs, spelled like it sounds, .ai. No www. I'm not into the extra if you don't need it. And then my personal site is robertvdv.com. So my brand is the no bullshit consulting, basically. So the kind of points we were talking about AI initiatives and all these other kinds of things. But it could be anything. I had a professor who said it great in college. He said, what most people need is an optorectomy. And I was like, what the hell is that? He's like, that's where you pull your head out of your ass. He's like, you can't see the world because your head's stuck in your ass. So if you need help with that, I can help you there, even free. But as far as Chip goes, so I'm one dude in a bubble. I've never made a robot before. I will be hacking an electric wheelchair that I just got today because it was cheaper than buying all the parts. So for people that know how to do this stuff, that are doing this stuff, I know there's obviously forums and things I can jump on and whatever, but I guess you could say I'm looking for my team. I'm looking for some people that aren't afraid of going on a podcast and being told they're crazy because their thing isn't really conscious. No, we probably need to find a better way to put it. But yeah, that's really trying to find the team. And then, of course, investment would be great. I've been self-funding ever since we started. I say we. I'm the chief executive everything. The chief everything officer. There you go. That's a bit better.
The me, myself, and I company.
Yeah, but I mean, I think between Chip and there's other projects we're working on too. We didn't talk about it, but Chip's really the main thing. It's just how do we ethically use AI with what we have now, right? Like right now, how do we make the best of this and not just spin our wheels or make life worse for people? That's really the goal of VDV Labs. So I guess if you share that,
and a noble goal at that. So comment, subscribe, go visit Robert's stuff. He's got his personal consultancy to help you out, and he's also got the VDV Labs to advance the cause. And I have to ask you, did you get the Voldemort?
Oh, all the time, right? We don't speak that name. Not as a kid, but
Robert, we cannot speak his name.
Yeah, I used to get a Vanderbilt. I was selling my old Volkswagen, and they're like, Vanderbilt? I was like, honey, if my last name was Vanderbilt, I wouldn't be selling my Volkswagen. But yeah, I've heard every permutation.
But it's a nice Dutch name, right? Vandervoort. I remember being in Amsterdam too at the train station, and the Dutch is such a quirky language in its own way. The rail lines are spoors, right? These spoors going out. Dutch was once likened to German being spoken while you're wearing a gas mask.
That's just horrible. Well, the Dutch still want their bikes back. So
that's right. The tulips. Remember the tulips. Thanks so much, Robert. It was a real pleasure. And good luck with all your stuff. And then we'll get your word out there. And thank you